Hello chess enthusiasts, my name is Miha and welcome to my chessrealm YouTube channel. Today I want to show you a game between John Nunn, genius mathematician who was also a chess grandmaster, and Lajos Portisch, one of the best players since his prime. The game was from 1988. John Nunn had white pieces and he started with e4, e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop to b5, and we have Spanish game or Ruy Lopez, however you want to call it. Black plays a6, bishop goes back to a4, and now d6, transposing into a Chinese variation of Ruy Lopez, and now white has decided to capture knight on c6, b pawn recapture, so white has given up on a bishop pair in order to obtain a better pawn structure. We will see who will be better able to exploit these advantages, and now white strikes the center with d4, e pawn captures on d4, queen recaptures, knight goes to f6, and now you can imagine normal developing moves were played. White castles king side, black plays bishop to e7, preparing also to castle king side. White plays knight to c3, and now of course black castles king side. And now white responds with rook to e1, supporting his pawn on e4, preparing this e5. Well, some exchange should happen at e5, knight to e5, attacking this weak pawn on c6 would be a strong asset. So black plays a very nice prophylactic move, bishop goes to g4, threatening to capture knight, also forcing white to obtain double pawns on the f file. So white defends with queen to d3. Of course, this knight is very powerful because after knight to d4, white can easily attack pawn on c6, prompting black to play bishop to d7 defending, or maybe even pushing the pawn, further weakening his position. So black has decided to capture knight on f3, queen recaptures, material is equal. Of course, black has double pawn along the c file, so white has a slight edge, but that's not so tragic. Black position is passive but solid, and black has decided to play knight to d7, clearing this f6, preparing bishop to f6, taking over the long diagonal. So white immediately responded with b2, bishop goes to f6, and now bishop goes to b2. So both bishops are facing each other on the long diagonal. And black continues with rook to e8. White responds with rook from a goes to d1, extraying queen on d8. Well, when these pieces are gone, all sort of tactics can come up. So black plays rook to e6, preparing queen to e8, or maybe even e7 later with rook to e8, gathering forces along the e file. And now white has decided to push his f pawn, so queen goes to h3, clearing this h file, queen goes to e7, and now f4. And black continues with rook to d8. Releasing the pressure here along the d file. Well, of course, this lone pawn on a6 is defenseless, but if white tries to grab it with, let's say, queen to d3, after a knight to c5, black can easily defend the pawn and also take the queen and also pawn on e4. So white has decided to play queen to e3, preparing to push these central pawns. And black continues with knight to b6, putting pressure on this c4 square, preparing c5 for maybe, and then later c4, trying to exchange his double pawns, but black never gets to see that because white is on the move and strikes the center with e5, attacking pawn on d6 and also bishop on f6. Of course, for the time being, this pawn on e5 cannot be removed because rook simply captures queen, but also knight to e4, attacking this bishop on f6 is quite unpleasant, and if black, let's say, removes the bishop back to e7, white can of course continue with a knight to e4. Of course, pawn is now protected, and if, for example, black would capture, then white would simply capture rook after queen recaptures, after f5. If black doesn't want to lose rook or even exchange, the only square for rook is h6, and then white would regain pawn back with a bishop to e5. Of course, black pieces are scattered all over the place. White is much better here, queen to g3, let's say, attacking the queen. White would also get a very nice attack here and much better position. So in the game, black has decided to capture pawn on e5, so d pawn captures on e5. Of course, white cannot simply recapture because after f pawn recapture, bishop recaptures. When this bishop is gone, let's say bishop to h2 check, we have discovered attack on the queen, and then black is controlling the open files. So here in this position, white plays a very nice pawn sack. f5 was played, attacking rook on d6. So black has to remove the rook. Well, if rook goes to, let's say, d6, then rook simply captures. After rook recaptures, knight to e4, again double attack on this bishop and rook. And here The only option for black would be to remove the rook, let's say, to d7, but after a knight captures, after pawn recapture, we have queen to g3, very unpleasant. There are only two moves for king, let's say to h8 or f8. If king goes to f8, bishop to a3, and now the only way to prevent check is to sacrifice the exchange. If, however, king would go to h8, then we will have rook to e5, and of course if f-pawn recaptures, then bishop simply recapture check, king cannot go anywhere and can only sacrifice queen for a bishop. So in the game, black has decided to play rook captures on d1, rook recaptures. Again, rook cannot go to d6 because rook simply captures. After c-pawn recaptures, then knight on b6 is for free. Still, black wants to challenge white here on the d-file, so rook to e7 was played, preparing this rook to e7 was played, preparing rook to d7, but white is on the move, knight to e4, attacking the bishop. There aren't any good squares for the bishop, so black has to sack the fact that he will get double pawns along the f-file. Rook to d7 was played, and now knight captures on f6, f-pawn recaptures, and of course white can capture on d7, but queen recaptures. Black has a very strong central pawn. This bishop is not a very powerful kill, so the game would be rather equal. So white wants to keep as much as tactical opportunities as possible. Rook goes to e1. Again, as I showed before, threatening with queen to g3 here, but the only difference is that now black is on the move and plays queen to d8, protecting this f6 square. So black can play f6, closing the long diagonal here at any time. So white continues with queen to e4, attacking pawn on c6. Black defends with knight to d5, it's interference, and now white plays queen to g4 check. Again, king has two options, h8 or f8. Well, let's say if king goes to f8, white can try bishop to a3, but now knight can go back to e7 defending. Of course, black's position is totally fine. Of course, black has worse pawn structure, especially this pawn on here on h7 can be easily captured, but that's not so tragic. Or maybe white could even try with bishop to c1, later to h6. Still, black would have a very good opportunities here. Anyway, this h-pawn was probably bordering black, so in the game, black decided to play king goes to h8. And white continues with bishop to c1, threatening bishop to h6. Of course, if black makes a random move, let's say a5, bishop goes to h6, threatening mate here on g7. Of course, black can defend easily with queen to g8, but then white would play rook to e4, protecting the queen. Even if black trades queen after rook to g4, here knight is tied to the defense of this f-pawn because white threatens with bishop to g7, double attack on king and the pawn, and black king is stuck here on h8, and that's definitely not the kind of position you want to be in. So in the game, black plays queen to f8, protecting this h6 square, preventing bishop to h6, and now white plays c4, attacking this strong knight on d5. Of course, black would try to return the pawn by playing a knight to f4, even if white trades light pieces. After e-pawn recaptures, queen recaptures, material is equal. Yeah, black has a couple of double pawns, but with a correct with correct play, the game should end up in a draw. In the game, black decided to play knight goes to b4, keeping this pass pawn on the e file. And white continues with queen to h4, attacking pawn on h6. Of course, black can defend with rook to d6, defending, but at any time white can drive this rook away with c5. So black plays queen to d6, protecting the pawn, also threatening queen to d4, double attack on king and queen, trying to force the exchange of the most dangerous piece. So white plays queen goes to h6. And black again has to be careful. For example, if black plays a random move, let's say a5, bishop goes to g5, threatening bishop to f6 with a checkmate. So, but even if f-pawn captures on g5, we have f6, and again, mate on g7 is unstoppable unless black sacrifices his queen. So in the game, black plays rook to d8. Now bishop to g5 doesn't work anymore because after f-pawn recaptures, f6, after rook to g8, black can easily defend the checkmate on g7, and with the piece up, black is winning. So white has no other options but to include his rook on e1 in the game, but the threat of check here on the first rank is quite unpleasant, so white plays h2 preparing, h3 preparing escape square on h2. And all black needed to do was to play rook to g8, rook to g7, and pawn on g7 would be defended and the position would be equal, but here black makes a fatal blunder. Black plays c5, protecting his knight. This was probably a miscalculation because now white plays rook to e4, threatening rook to h4 with the checkmate. Let's see if black makes a random move. After rook to h4, the only way to prevent mate is king to g8, but after rook to g4, king goes back to h8, queen to g7, checkmate. So here the only option for black would be to prevent checkmate with queen to d1 check, after king to h2, king to g1, and rook to g4, and here black can only sacrifice queen for a rook, but that's a total winning position for white. So in the game black plays rook to g8, preparing rook to g7, and then black would be safe. But white is on the move and has a mate in 4. I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to find it. White played queen to h7 check. King cannot go on anywhere and can only capture queen, but then we have rook to h4 check. Now g6 square is protected, so king can go on to g7. After bishop to h6 is check. After king to h1 or h7 doesn't matter. We have bishop to f8, discover, check, and mate. And realizing that all is lost, in this position, Lajos Portisch resigned the game. So I hope you like this game, I hope you have learned something from it. If you have any questions, my email is below in the description. Of course, I invite you to visit my Instagram page. That's it for now, and see you soon.